Hi, welcome to Boring Money, Rich Life. I'm your host, Joy Hicks. Today we're going to talk about tariffs. One of the big tariffs that's kind of in headlines today is the 25% automotive tariff that Trump is putting into place. And I think it's pretty big just because there's still a lot of confusion around it. So, what he wants to do, he wants to put a 25% tariff on any vehicle that is not manufactured within the US. Now, the reason why there's kind of confusion around that is because it takes thousands of parts to actually create a vehicle. So that means that in order to create one car, you might have had to import things from many different countries. So I think people are kind of waiting to see what the final tariff is going to be, just because it's like, okay, is a 25% tariff only going to apply to China, Mexico, and Canada, or is it going to apply to all countries? So I feel like that one is kind of like a wait and see type of thing. April 2nd is the day that that's supposed to kind of take into effect. And so there are talks, though, that vehicles are definitely going to increase in price. I did read something today that was saying they're estimating maybe like a $6,000 increase on vehicles, which is crazy because cars are a depreciating asset. So it's like as soon as you buy a car, its value goes down immediately. So to have to pay more, $6,000 more for a car that's just going to go down in value. And let's say you end up financing that car after 5 years, it's not even worth it. So it's like, I think it's kind of like a wait and see. And a lot of people are also kind of watching the stock market because there's three major companies who are kind of being impacted by this. So that's General Motors, Ford Motor, and then Stellantis. And so people are definitely kind of watching how the market responds to these three different companies. And again, just kind of waiting to see what this is going to look like. But I wanted to kind of talk about tariffs in general because I feel like there's just been so much that has happened since February up until now, heading into April. And I feel like I'm not alone in just kind of feeling like confused about what has happened, where we are with the tariffs. So I found this article and it's titled, Here's How Countries Are Retaliating Against Trump's Tariffs. And it's written by the Council on Foreign Relations. So the reason why I like this article is because it kind of gives you like a timeline of what happened in February all the way up until now. And then it also breaks it down by country, which I like. So I'm going to go through it with you guys because, again, I feel like I'm not the only person who is confused on just what is happening with all of these tariffs. On February 1st, the US announced a 25% tariff on all Canadian goods with a 10% tariff on Canadian energy. On that same day, Canada placed a 25% tariff on 108 billion worth of US goods. The next day, Manitoba, Ontario, Prince Edward's Island, Quebec, and Yukon announced that they would stop selling U.S. alcohol. On the 3rd, the U.S. announced a 1 month delay on the 25% tariff. Then on that same day, New Brunswick announced that they would also stop selling U.S. alcohol. And then Canada's first phase of their 25% tariff on 21 billion worth of U.S. goods went into effect. And then on February 10th, the U.S. announced a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel products. On the 14th, the U.S. also threatened an auto tariff during that time. And then on March 3rd, the U.S. announced a 25% tariff on Canadian goods that don't satisfy the USMCA rules. And that's the agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico. On March 4th, Canada announced a 25% tariff on 21 billion worth of US goods. So in the article, it was kind of saying that that tariff would pretty much impact like agriculture, appliances, motorcycles, apparel, certain paper products, and footwear. And then on the 6th, the US announced a 1 month exemption for goods that were under that agreement. Then on the 7th, the next day, the US threatened a 250% tariff on Canadian dairy products. And then on March 10th, British Columbia bans US alcohol at government stores. Ontario imposes a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to Michigan, Minnesota, and New York. And I want to say this was kind of around like Super Bowl time when they were threatening to like cut our power off due to all of this. And then on March 11th, the US kind of like backtracked on the tariffs for the Canadian aluminum and steel. And that's also the same day that Ontario suspended their surcharge on electricity exports as well. Then on March 12th, the US put a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel. Then on the 13th, Canada announced a 25% tariff on 21 billion worth of US goods. And then fast forward to now, we're kind of waiting to see what happens on April 2nd. And on April 2nd, we're anticipating that the US reciprocal tariffs will start to take effect. And then also on that same day, Canada's 25% tariffs on 87 billion worth of US goods are also scheduled to take effect. So all of that is literally just from Canada. Next on the list, we have China. For February 1st on China, the US implements a 10% tariff on all Chinese goods. Then on February 4th, China announced their first round of 10% and 15% tariffs on 20 billion worth of US goods. They also implemented a kind of like export control on critical minerals. They also launched an antitrust investigation into Google. And then it also said they added some other US companies to its unreliable entity list. Then on February 10th, China's first round of those 10% and 15% tariffs on those 20 billion worth of goods actually took effect. In the article, it was saying the things that were actually impacted on February 10th would have been coal, liquefied natural gas, crude oil, agricultural machinery, large vehicles, and pickup trucks. And then on February 13th, the US threatened a reciprocal tariffs on all trade partners. Then on February 14th, the US threatens auto tariffs on all trade partners. On March 3rd, the US placed additional 10% tariffs on all Chinese goods, bringing the actual tariff rate to 20%. And then also on that same day, China announced their second round of 10% and 15% tariffs on 21 billion worth of US goods. Then on March 10th, China their second round of the 10% and 15% tariffs on those 21 billion worth of goods took effect. And then on March 12th, the US announced a 25% tariff on all aluminum and steel products. And now we're waiting to see with China, again on April 2nd, it's saying we're waiting to see kind of what the reciprocal tariffs on all trade partners are scheduled to take effect. So that's also a lot. And then have the European Union or the EU. On February 10th, the US announced a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel products. Then on February 14th, the US threatened auto tariffs on all trade partners. On March 11th, the EU announced a retaliatory tariff. So they were saying it was going to reinstate the 2018 and the 2020 countermeasures and place new tariffs on 28 billion worth of US goods. Then on March 12th, the US put a 25% tariff into effect on aluminum and steel. On the 13th, the US threatened a 200% tariff on alcohol. And then on March 20th, the EU announced a retaliatory tariff will be delayed until mid-April. And then kind of fast forwarding to now, April 2nd is kind of what we're looking towards. We're waiting to see what that reciprocal tariff would be. And then lastly, we have Mexico. So for Mexico, on February 1st, the US announced a 25% tariff on all Mexican goods. On February 3rd, it announced a 1-month delay of that 25% tariff. On February 10th, it announced a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel. On February 14th, the US threatened an auto tariff on all trade partners. On March 4th, Mexico threatened tariffs on US goods. Then on March 6th, the US announced a 25% tariff on Mexican goods that do not satisfy that USMCA agreement. Then on March 9th, Mexico held a mass celebration in response to Trump's decision to exempt tariffs for Mexican goods that are covered under the USMCA agreement. Then on March 12th, the US put the 25% tariff on aluminum and steel in effect. And then again, we're waiting on April 2nd to see all of those reciprocal tariffs go into place. So I went through that entire list just because I feel like, again, there has been so much happening since February. We are barely in April. We haven't even made it to April yet. And there's just been so much that has happened in regards to the US putting on tariffs, other countries announcing retaliatory tariffs, tariffs going into effect, exemptions, all of these different things. So I felt like it was really important for us to at least officially get caught up so we know where we're at. And now it's kind of like a wait and see. So I'll definitely be tracking what happens over the next week, what is actually put into place, if anything has kind of been, retracted, or if any of the tariffs have been lessened. So I'll definitely keep you guys updated. But as always, what is one boring thing that you can do today to start fueling your rich life? Again, I'm your host, Joy Hicks. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe.